news. Corporate India is making greater profits. It's never been so good for them. It's been an impressive financial performance. Bad news for us. Hiring hasn't matched this. Neither have the salary growths. Well, it's not me saying this. It's India's Finance Minister and the Economic Survey. Let's make sense of this today. In terms of financial performance, the corporate sector has never had it so good. Results of a sample of over 33,000 companies show that. In the 3 years between financial year 20 and financial year 23, the profit before taxes of the Indian corporate sector nearly quadrupled. Hiring and salary hardly kept up with it, but it is in the interest of the companies to step up hiring and worker compensations or salaries. This is what the Economic Survey states: job creation mainly a responsibility of the private sector. Let's look at some numbers. Top 10 IT companies made a profit, a whopping profit. In fact, if you just look at TCS, it made 42,303 crore rupees. That's the profit I'm talking about. Revenue has seen an increase from 2% to 4%. 3 to 4 top companies. Highest ever large deal wins for Infosys at about $3.15 billion. And according to Microsoft, just 3 companies, TCS, Infosys, Wipro, have witnessed a substantial decrease in combined workforce by almost 64,000 in the financial year 2024. Top 8 IT companies' collective headcount has fallen over 17,500 in December quarter itself. Total staff count at major IT companies fell by 75,000 in an year. Sharpest fall in 6 years. In fact, in a first, the top 6 IT companies, including TCS, Infosys, LTI, Mindtree, Tech Mahindra and Wipro, reported a reduction in their total headcount in the last fiscal year, with only HCL Tech adding employees. But these are not the only numbers. Remember the big layoffs over the last 1 year. The tech industry continues to reel under layoffs as more and more companies are sacking staffs from across departments. Amazon, Apple, and Byju's are some big names that have already laid off their staff in the past few weeks itself, but over the last 1 year actually. Look at those numbers. Most companies have attributed the usual reasons, such as overhiring during the pandemic era, strategic shifts, downsizing extra. Based on layoffs.fyi, so far 235 companies have laid off over 57,785 employees in just 2024. In January, 121 companies sacked 34,007 employees, and in February, 74 companies axed 15,500 jobs. In 2023, around 20,000 techies affected by unannounced layoffs. Hiring in IT sector dropped by at least 25% versus last year. Active job volumes dropped by nearly 50% on a year-on-year basis. And startups laid off close to 5,000 people in 2023. Now, in contrast, if the Economic Survey does say that the corporate sector hasn't had this good in a long time and that profits are being made, why do jobs and salaries look like they do in India? In fact, let's look at some numbers. Sharp rise in unemployment rate. Again, unemployment has become now such a complex issue in India because there are multiple reports, multiple surveys that give different data. CMIE data said in June 2024 it was at 9.2%. In May 2024 it was at 7%. So it's actually seen an increase according to the CMIE data. But if you look at the PLFS data, in 2017, according to them, this is the government's PLFS data. If you look at 2017, it was 18.6%. And if we can have that data up. And in 2022-23, it was 3.2%. So according to the PLFS data, it's actually halved. The unemployment rate has halved. Then you have the Citigroup report, if you remember. Can India create enough jobs? And according to Citigroup, they wouldn't be able to create enough jobs at 7% GDP growth. Creation of 80 to 90 lakh jobs a year is what was expected. The requirement was around 1.1 to 1.2 crore jobs per year. And if that is one set of data, look at this. India's youth and jobs. 83% of the unemployed workforce comprise of Indian youth, Indian young people. Look at that number. Astonishing number. And to add to it, today's economic survey states 1 in 2 graduates are unemployable. That's another turf altogether, something that we will look at in coming days. Nonetheless, just look at these statistics. But also the job creation happens mainly in the private sector is what the Indian survey has said, the economic survey has said. These may be complex theoretical issues, but these are issues that directly impact your life and mine, and that's why we are opening this up to a panel as well. I'm being joined by Rituparna Chakrabarti, who's an independent director at Team Lease, Advocate Mahima Singh, who's a spokesperson for Congress, Manish Barriar, who's a political analyst, as well as Sandeep Chachra, who's a public policy expert. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us. We just hope that we'll be able to break this down, make it very simple, because it is a complex issue, but this is something that everybody really talks about. Rituparna Chakrabarti, to you first. What do we make out of this, Ms. Rituparna, when we are talking about the economic survey? The economic survey is saying that much of the jobs are in the private sector. It's not doing what it's supposed to do when it comes to job creation. That's being number one. It's saying the private sector has never had it so good. It's saying private sector is marking profits, but the hiring and the salaries are not increasing. So how do you look at this?
Thank you for having me on the show. And like you rightly pointed out, that this is very complex and it's very layered. But let me just make some comments based on what I've not had the chance to read the entire report, but some parts of it that I've gone through. The report says that the private sector has had it good and profits have gone up, and I'm sure that's an undeniable fact. The report also suggests that the most of job creation, India is looking forward to the private sector to create most of the jobs. And I guess, that's probably an accurate expectation from the private sector. But I think somewhere where I have a difference of opinion with the analysis that's being portrayed. The thing is, yes, we should rely and we are depending on the private sector to create more jobs, but putting the entire and making the private sector take the blame for the lack of job creation is the most simplistic view one can take. And that's not going to help us solve the problem, first of all. I think what's going on right now is that, of course, private sector are answerable. And I saw some of the mentions of startups. None of the startups, honestly, are making profits. And some of the names that you threw, honestly, none of them ever saw a single penny of profit, as far as I recall. Does the tech sector make profit? Definitely. Quite a few of them are listed, and they're just delivering what is expected of listed companies, which is showcasing profitability growth year on year. But India's biggest problem is productivity. India's problem is, I think recently there was an RBI index which clearly called out that over the last 1 year, India's productivity, employee productivity has been going down. So the problem here right now is that one expects higher wages. And that's, of course, we should have India's per capita income should go up. But how do you get higher wages? Higher wages will not happen just by paying people more. Higher wages we demand when the skill level of the country and the overall actually achieves the productivity growth expectation that one has for a country like India or for many of these private sector companies that we are talking about, where we are trying to globally compete with the giants. That is definitely broken, and that is not happening. And that is honestly something one can put the blame on private sector, but I don't think it's a problem that can be solved by the private sector alone. So skill is one issue. Second is the entire ecosystem, access, just the general infrastructure access that the country provides, the road, the port, the airport. There is so much more that we can do to kind of improve overall productivity for the country and for private sector. However, in the absence of it, what's the choice left for private sector? Let's cut jobs to showcase profitability. Let's ensure that we are keeping our revisions and wage escalation as moderate as possible. Is that the long-term solution? No, but does that help them meet their quarter expectation? It does. So I think this deserves a much wider conversation rather than saying private sector should just create more jobs. There are much more layers to look into, and if we don't deny ourselves a look into all those aspects, this problem won't be solved.
I don't think we should deny at all, and that's why, for starters, we have all of you, and we hope to, in days to come, look into this much deeper. But Sandeep Chachra, if I can come into with you, you heard Ms. Ritu speak right now, and you heard it very clearly. She's saying the mandate for the private sector may be that, but you can't put the entire blame of the lack of jobs in the market on the private sector. When you heard of the economic survey today, when you heard what was, when you read it, did you get a sense of what Mr. Tuparna is saying? Does it look like the entire blame is being shifted to the private sector? Because that's what some have echoed.
So thank you, Sneha, for having me here, and good evening to all. I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, on the private sector, the message is clear, and I think it's important because what we have seen for the last 3 decades, it's not just now, is the share of labor in the capital formation has continuously gone down. And it's good that the economic survey points to it and therefore points to the responsibility. In a welfare state, you can't have a private sector that's totally unhinged. And it is the responsibility of the state to encourage, message, and also regulate. So I welcome this message. Because if you look at data you presented a lot, I'm not going to repeat it, there's much more data available. But quite clearly, the job creation, even the wages in the private sector have not kept pace with it. ILO notes, International Labour Organization notes in general, that in the Indian context, wage growth has been very, very low, particularly for low and middle income groups, and amongst the lowest in Asia. But going beyond, there's another trend. So the one is the question of employment and creating that employment and the role of private sector. It's important to message and regulate that. But second is another notable trend, and that is the trend of growing contractualization in the private sector. So if you look at data, I have some data here from the annual survey of industries. If you look at recent data and compare it with the annual survey of industries in 2002-03 to now, you will find that the rate of growth of contractual workers, which are under lesser employment conditions, insecurity of wages, not permanent, social security not given, it's grown rapidly. It currently stands in 2021-22 at 40%. And this is more pronounced in factories operating in rural India, in the countryside, in the agrarian India. And that has grown. If you sort of see it, it was used to be 23% in
because it's easy, hire and fire. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. So yes, it's hire and fire, impermanent contracts, flexible working conditions, a lot of things that you've already pointed to, but lower employment. But then, having said this, so there's a responsibility of industry, not just to create jobs, but also quality of jobs and also respecting the labor rights. So I think that's one message this can multiply into. But there's a second issue, which is very, very important. The creation of job, as my earlier panelists were speaking, is not just the responsibility of private sector primarily, because a large majority of the working people in India are in the informal sector. And not just that, and there again, your data was pointing to a more general picture, some progression, some regressions, and the inability to create jobs, to youthful India, where the aspirations are much higher, to data which points to the fact that there's an issue there. There's a huge crisis there. I take instance of the MGNREGA data. The MGNREGA data of 2019, 2020, 2020 tells us that 265 point some crore jobs were created. But in 2023-24, 40 more crores of jobs were given, % days of employment, which stands to 305 crores roughly. So you know that the demand is there. We know the demand is there incidentally through when you have job applications for a few thousand, you see lakhs and lakhs of people, endless lakhs of people apply to those jobs. Most recently, the instance was in Bombay. So the need for jobs is huge. And therefore,
Absolutely.
the
And if you can
government
have those
has
visuals
to,
as well.
yeah, and the government therefore has to create pathways for creation of jobs in rural India and creation of jobs in urban India. I mean, the right to work is a dream. So we must work towards this.
Okay.
So
Okay.
MGNREG expansion, number of days expansion, these are pathways, but there are other pathways available. And incidentally, Snehaji, before I end, I must also say that industry bodies, I was listening into what CII's view is, are actually wanting this. They are wanting state investment into rural infrastructure. They're wanting job creation, direct job creation instruments. They're wanting, sort of creation of agricultural supply chains and better supply chains. So essentially putting money in the hands of people, not just through welfare schemes. So yes, the expectation for tomorrow is budget day, and the expectation of augmentation of PM Kisan is very much there. So, amount of, but
We'll come
expectation
to
is
that in a
also
bit,
to
sir. Let
have.
me just go across to other panelists as well after the two important points that you have raised as well as Ms. Rituparna has raised. Manish Barriar, let me just come to you first. Look at what both the panelists have said. There seems to be a huge concern here, and let me just ask this straight. The buck stops with whom?
I think, you've been talking about, Sneha, that it is very layered and everybody is talking about. It's actually quite complex. So I would look at it from 2 points of view. One is that, I would say, and I would admit that India is sitting on a time bomb as far as jobs are concerned. And I think the government had to bear the brunt. You look at the recent elections, and I think a part of the problem is reflected, the government got its, in fact, due because the youth of the country were pretty angry. So you can actually look at job as a very, very important priority. And it's good that we are discussing this, and even the economic survey is brought in. Now, you look at, job creation from 2 points of view. Government cannot shy away from job creation. Over a period of time, the gentleman before me, he rightly pointed out about contractual work in private sector. But I would like to say that even the government sector has become very much contractual. And government is one of the largest, in fact, employers as far as this country is concerned. You look at railways, you look at army, you look at, LIC and other things. A lot of PSUs used to be there. I think government is missing.
I have to ask you
time.
because I was confused, and of course I read up on it, but I think it's important to clarify this to our viewers. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I'm just asking you another aspect of what you are responding to. When the economic survey says that the private sector is the largest job creator, and when you say the government is the largest employer, what is the difference?
Absolutely. It says around 40% of jobs are being created out there in the formal sector, in private sector. But if you look at government as an employer itself, I was trying to say that government cannot really shift the blame to the private sector. Having said that, I would agree with both the panelists that even especially the previous one, who says that private sector has a lot to do when it comes to wage increase. Now, there are global factors. We know artificial intelligence, which came in economic survey, is one of the reasons why all the companies which you counted that their jobs have been lost is primarily because right now we are at the, what you say, in a flux. There's a huge technology change which has happened, and it was bound to have an IT sector and things related to IT. So it's not something which is shocking. It was coming and it is known. But I think even beyond the jobs which you mentioned in your report, there are other sectors also. For example, again, MSMEs, which I would again say the gentleman before me pointed out. See, demonetization as well as GST, and then later on the global shock of the pandemic. These three have really, impacted MSMEs, and MSMEs have also created a lot of jobs. So there is a huge distress. So actually this topic is something which you can talk on and on, but by and large, if let's take up if the companies private sector
Mr. Manish Barriar, let's just look at the graphs that we have on our screens. Look at this. Look at the graphs we have on our screen. It's a huge graph. It just shows how pronounced the unemployment challenge really is currently. Just look at that. And we're showing this over the last few years very clearly. How steep is this? And as I said, there are so many documents, there are so many research. You have the government data, you have the CMIE, then you have the ILO, you have all of them here. But this is just one aspect of it, and it's very, very difficult to explain. And then you have what the economic survey puts out. 1 in 2 youth are unemployable with respect to their degrees. Ms. Mahima, do you want to come in?
Government's understanding and conduct of economic strategy is like, the lights are on, but there's nobody home. Gaslighting is a characteristic trait of the conduct of this government. So that is why they're blaming it on the private sector today. And hearing all the panelists on your show today, and the fact that there's no BJP spokesperson on your show to speak on the topic, it gives away a lot. It is a matter of fact, Sneha, that over the past decade, we have seen that there has been a tremendous waiver of skyrocketing corporate taxes. Yet the youth of this country are lurking in shadows, hoping that someday this government will live to some extent its promise of job creation of 2 crore jobs per year. Now, if you speak about creation of jobs by the government as a matter of directives of the state policy, you see, it's a very, very poor translation and interpretation of what the directive of the state policy holds in the Constitution of India, because it is the government's responsibility. In fact, the government is supposed to be the ideal employer. But on the contrary, what we see is gaslighting, and which is why our leader, an astute politician and astute economist,
So,
Mr. Jairam,
would you just explain this a bit? Why do you call this gaslighting?
Allow me to complete, Sneha. I'll come to that. Allow me to complete.
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm just asking for a clarification.
In fact, I'll say why gaslighting, because as Mr. Jairam Ramesh, an astute economist himself, has stated that the Modi government's approach to the corporate sector has been to give generous handouts to the corporates, to the crony capitalist friends of theirs, like, 1.5 lakh crore corporate tax cuts and the rupees 2 lakh crore PLIs without directly incentivizing investment or hiring. Whereas its job was to create jobs for the youth of this country, let alone creation of jobs. Today, when this much awaited data has come out, which they have tried to cover up and tried to manipulate here and there by its pakodanomics, what we see is that experts can see through, and experts have spoken on your show, that actually it is not the private sector's job to create. It's not the private sector's responsibility to create the much needed jobs for our youth, but the public sector, but the state. And there are 10 lakh vacancies which we have been constantly pointing out. In our Nyay Patra, we have talked about Yuva Nyay. We have talked about the accountability and responsibility of the government, where we say, you see, if the India government comes into rule, we will bring about right to apprenticeship. That is the need of the hour.
Okay.
We will bring about Pehli Naukri Pakki. That is the need of the hour. A conducive support system for the youth, that is the need of the hour. That is what our Nyay Patra talked about. But the government, it only keeps on running away from responsibility, shirking responsibility like they have today by sending a spokesperson on your show, but they will not talk about their own responsibility. And now it has come to the private sector. And forget not when Mr. Modi said, Mr. Modi talked about gunny bags of money being loaded in tempos, Mr. Adani, transporting it everywhere, and nothing has been done about it. He's talked about it explicitly. So he's indicating towards the conducive environment he's created for the corporates, for his crony capitalist friends, rather leaving our youth to fend for themselves.
Sneha, can I come in?
Okay. All right. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Quickly, before please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mr. Manish.
I would not agree with what the spokesperson from Congress has said. If you look at Indian economy, it is one of the best run economies in the world right now. If you look at the developed nations, the average growth is around 2.6 to 2.5%. And if you look at the developing nations like India, the average growth is around 4.5%. I think the first responsibility of the government is to ensure that the economy runs properly. So from that point of view,
but if the economy is running properly, why is unemployment rate on the rise? or the government may say that it is not, that the official data is not being catered into.
Can you please let me complete on that?
Please, I mean, I'm just asking you a subsequent question which you can answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Please let me complete. This economy is being run very nicely. So there's no problem as far as the way economy is running. Still, this government is actually, projecting around 6.5 to 7.5 GDP growth rate, which would be one of the highest in the world. I think you have to also look at socio-economic factors, the mindset issues as far as job creation is concerned. Indian youth, the mindset is about government jobs. The mindset is about job. That needs to change. Globally, it has changed in many of the countries, and especially the countries which are moving from developing nations to developed nations. Entrepreneurship is the key. And every year, the number of graduates, because of population explosion also, it's coming up year after year. So I'm not justifying that government has not been able to do it. But to be honest, I have not seen any Congress government really being able to do a good job, because we saw in Rajasthan, it was one of the highest unemployment rate in the country consistently during Congress government, 31 to 32%. So either of the political divide, we have not seen they being able to really highlight this issue or to take it on a very emergency basis.
Okay. All right. Okay. Just one point before I go to my other panelist, Ms. Rituparna. Just one point, and this is going to be very interesting for our viewers. While you have the chart up on our screens where we are showing you the graph, if you can get that graph back on the screen, please. We're showing you the unemployment graph. Here's a little trivia. Do you know who is defined as employed in India? You could be working for just 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. And you would be considered employed according to the survey. You could be working for free and you could still be considered as employed. Just a trivia. Ms. Rituparna, to you. Now, of course, we have the budget coming up. I'll quickly ask you the expectations on it also. But what was the sense that you got today? Do you really think that the government was passing the buck onto the private sector? Is that how you saw what unfolded in the economic survey largely?
Almost, I think a conversation and debate like this had no room for petty politics, Neha. This is far more serious than throwing bucks. So when I was referencing government, I was not referring to a particular party. If India today is in a situation where we need 1.2 crore jobs and we are barely able to fill 70, 80 lakhs of them, that's because of the 60 years since independence that have gone by. And it is not something which has happened overnight. So, and this is something which is a structural problem, and hence we have to leave aside politics for the sake of our youth to figure out what the real problem is. My sense is that the economic survey essentially, I'm actually very glad because it has stated fact as it is. Is it correct that private sector is the one who essentially can be net employment generator for the country? Absolutely. However, where the government role comes in, I am actually not of the view that the government themselves have to become the largest employer in the country. I actually believe that government, which includes state government, which includes central government, which constitutes all kinds of parties, by the way, have to make this their central agenda, have to ensure that there is an ecosystem of level playing ground for private sector to openly expand, innovate, hire more people, take chances. There should not be a price for failure. And when you create that ecosystem is when you will see this problem diminishing. Have efforts been made over the last, decade or so? Of course. I mean, Make in India is a great initiative. Creating smart cities is a great initiative. I mean, I can rant. The amendment of the Apprenticeship Act is a great initiative. I can rattle just that. My only submission and appeal is that it's good, but it's not enough. So we have to keep at it. We have a lot more job to get done before we can step back and say, okay, yeah, we've done enough. We've really not done enough. Are we on the right path? Of course. But there's a lot more to be done. So I think this is a great eye-opener, but this should not be leveraged for petty politics.
Okay, Advocate Mahima Singh, a minute to you. I can't give you more minutes because you're totally tight on time. You could give a quick response.
With respect, Sneha, when talk about petty politics. I believe that it's a matter of politics. And a politic commentary or a politic comment upon what is happening, what the survey is talking about, how the government is shirking its responsibility, which is its duty as per the directive principles of the state policy, I think is a matter of it's a matter of discussion. And all I'm talking about is matters of fact. For example, you see the survey tells us that manufacturing sector employment creation has been subdued, strongly subdued in the past decade. And it talks about the reality of make in India. So when we talk about that the economy is functioning properly today, but, we are on the rise as a matter of economy on the world scale. We must remember that in 2008, when the whole world was witnessing a widespread recession, it was India that was setting example when Dr. Manmohan Singh was leading the way for us. So yes, you see, we have faced challenges in the past, but unlike this government,
All right.
no government has really shirked off its responsibility and continuously put its responsibility
we're totally out of time, ma'am.
and gaslit.
Okay, whether petty politics or not, we leave that to viewers to decide. But politics, it definitely is. And that's one thing I have to say. In fact, as students, when we used to study, one of the first definitions of the budget that we would study is it is a political statement on the economy of economics. Sandeep Chachra, you're raising your hand for quite a long time. Thank you for your patience. Please go ahead. You wanted to make a point.
Couple of quick ones. Firstly, on the trivia that you mentioned is something that needs to be repaired. It's not just a trivia. The definitions of employment are at variance, total variance with common sense understanding of what employment means and real understanding to people of what employment is. Secondly, at this point, when buoyed by RBI
I'm
dividends,
glad someone has said that.
Yeah, but buoyed by RBI dividends, a strong growth trajectory, it's a responsibility for the new government, but also a historic compulsion, which it can't just, it's not just only about private sector. It has to have direct measures to address the employment problem and create employment as a state directly, apart from, of course, together with private sector, the messaging which has been done today. So I don't think the messaging is only limited to private sector. This is also a messaging back to the budget, where social expectations are huge, Snehaji, of instruments to revive what is called a rural economy and urban economy in the hands of people. Essentially, the cooperative movement needs to be revitalized.
Right.
The question of women's skills and women's jobs needs to be given a central attention. Since you were asking budget expectations related to these are the kind of expectations we need to see. We need to see rural and urban futures in the hands of people, who are unemployed, partly employed. What is a new social class today of totally unemployed kind of people as well. It's a new social class. So I think there are lots of things which your conversation opens up. I know there's not time enough, but I think these are things that are welcome, and I'm happy and glad that you have initiated this discussion. Thank you, Snehaji.
Rituparna Chakrabarti, Advocate Mahima Singh, Manish Barriar, as well as Sandeep Chachra. I must thank all of you for coming in, for bringing in your perspectives. It's a big day tomorrow, and all eyes would be keenly watching whether the reality of jobs, the reality of salaries, the reality of people's livelihoods would see a new direction. That's something that we will report very closely. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to our viewers for joining us.